Welcome back to the Roadman Cycling Podcast, where we're always on the lookout for experts who are pushing the boundaries of health and wellness. And today we've got someone truly special, a former world-class athlete turned best-selling author who revolutionized the way we approach diet and exercise. What sets him apart is his primal approach to life, which emphasizes eating real food, moving in ways that our bodies are designed to move, and living in harmony with our environment. So get ready to be inspired, because today we're diving into the world of primal living with the incredible Mr. Mark Sisson. Mark, welcome to the Roadman Cycling Podcast.
Hey, thanks for having me, Anthony.
Mark, I was in a place, we spoke briefly off air, so you know a little bit of my backstory, but I remember when I was close to my lowest ebb in health and fitness, and I needed a week to recharge myself. And a place I've gone to time and time again when I need to recharge myself, it's a little Catalonian village called Girona. All of our cycling listeners will know this place. If you haven't been out there, check it out. It's amazing. And I remember sitting in a cafe there, and I found one of your early books. I think it was your one you published in 2009, your Primal Blueprint book. Right. And I was frantically transcribing this book on the steps to that cafe. And when I look back and I kind of reflect on, where I was and where I've come to, that's one of those inflection points in my journey. So I've been kind of weirdly voyeuristically following you for quite a while. So it is a bit of an honor to actually chat with you.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate that. Sure.
You come from an endurance sports background, and it's a background that a lot of our listeners will resonate with. You successful career as a triathlete, a runner, an Ironman competitor. How did those early experience, how did that shape your approach to diet and exercise?
Well, I was an early student of performance. I mean, I'm going back, like I was 12, 13 years old, and I was already reading stuff on diet and exercise, and primarily about longevity. I had some weird fascination with living a long life when I was very young. And one of the things that got me into running initially was reading Ken Cooper's book on aerobics, where Cooper said, the more you did that raised your heart rate for the longest period of time, the longer you'd live. And I'm like, okay, I can do that. So I started running a lot. And as I was running a lot, I of necessity had to figure out a way to fuel all those miles. So I started looking into diet and improving performance. I started competing in track and field events. I started doing road races as a runner. As you know, as an endurance athlete, it's all about the clock. It's all about the time, bringing those times down. How could I train harder and run faster? And I just, the fascination with the diet was sort of overlain by the idea that there was only so many miles I could put in. My body could only take so many miles of running. So what could I do to improve those miles and increase the amount of strain and stress I could put on my body without breaking down? And, you, and I think a lot of your listeners will agree that as an endurance athlete, it's a weird pursuit, because really what you're doing is managing discomfort all the time, right? People talk about the pain, and it's not really painful unless you get an injury, but it's really uncomfortable. And so, day in and day out, you're trying to dig a hole for yourself to see how deep you could put yourself in this hole and emerge later on stronger. In a very sort of nihilistic Nietzschean way, that which doesn't kill me makes me stronger. And certainly the endurance athlete is the epitome of this. Every single day you're managing discomfort. And some days it's fun, I guess. I don't know. I mean, I think the fun is more like it'll be great when it's over. I will have deserved that point of Guinness when I've, the cold one when I finished my workout. But going back to the nutrition part of this, so how could I recover quickly? How could I dig myself out of that hole quickly with diet and supplements or whatever sort of nutritional assistance I could give myself within reason? And so that really became a point of interest for me, was how could I improve my performance with my diet and exercise? And I really understood quite early on that it wasn't just about replenishing carbohydrates every day after the workout so you could go out and do it again tomorrow and repeat that process every day for 20 years, which a lot of us have done and a lot of us still do. So I started to dig into, the importance of healthy fats and how fat metabolism was really the sort of the primary driver, and in many cases, sort of the main difference between a real elite performing athlete and someone who's just going out there and putting in the miles without regard to how that effort is being fueled, right? So anyway, that was the original interest, and then it just took off, and I started applying it across the broad spectrum of human endeavor, from elite athletes up to people trying to lose 100 pounds, through people trying to mitigate pain and suffering in a normal life from being, overweight or having arthritis or having autoimmune diseases, having type 2 diabetes or metabolic syndrome. And then that kind of became my main focus was just the average person. What can we do to improve our lives by eating better? That's essentially what it came down to.
Where was that switch where you decided to share it with other people? I know you're a serial entrepreneur and sold your company not too recently. Congrats on that. Nice. But this quote that entrepreneurs take responsibility for solving a problem that isn't theirs. At what point did you go, okay, I figured this out for myself, but now like there's a switch there where you decide, okay, now I'm going to solve the problem for everyone else?
Yeah. And that's a good, I think there was no one point, but because the initial early switch was in 1982 when I wrote a book called Training. It was a Runner's World Training book. And it was the first real book on training for triathlon. I had done Ironman. I had finished fourth. I had a lot of lessons that came out of that, one of which was about overtraining and how we tend to do things way more than we should, especially in the endurance world. We always think more miles is, somehow is going to add up to a better performance, and it doesn't always happen that way.
The runners still do this. I have friends who are runners that are still 100 mile a week.
And I was, absolutely. And I was one of those 100 miles a week for 7 years. And it was probably 20 miles, 30 miles a week more than I should have done, given my genetics, my body composition, my body type, et cetera, et cetera. So what I learned from that Ironman experience, and I went on to become a coach of a professional team and coaching individuals, I felt obligated to write down and share it with other people who wanted to compete in triathlon. This was not ever going to be a big money-making effort for me to write a book on training for triathlon. I mean, you could count the number of triathletes in the world in those days in the maybe tens of thousands, certainly not hundreds of thousands. So that, I started writing books, and I realized that I was someone who, when I discovered something and I had something to say about it, I wanted to put it out there and make it available for the general public to consume. But it was really around 2005 when my whole life I'd suffered from irritable bowel syndrome. I'd had all these issues, many of which had forced me to retire from competition. So it wasn't really as much the overtraining, although that was part of it. It was the inflammatory diet that I had taken on to fuel all those miles. It was really causing the issue. So I had arthritis in my feet, I had tendonitis in my hips, I had irritable bowel syndrome that really ran my life. I mean, I had to kind of orchestrate my day based around where the nearest bathroom was, not to get too graphic. Yeah, it was really rough. And I had GERD, gastroesophageal reflux disease. I had sinus infections. I got colds and upper respiratory tract infections 5 or 6 times a year, because I had no immune system, not just from overtraining, but from this. I find out later from this diet. I had been writing about carbo loading for years and years, and I was still a fan of carbo loading at the time. How do you manage your glycogen? How do you manage your glucose intake? And at one point, because so much of my diet was based on grains, because it's tough to get 1,000 grams of carbs a day without consuming some form of grain products. My wife just said, look, you're writing about grains, and some of the writing that you're doing is about how antithetical grains are to health. And, these anti-nutrients, these phytates and these and gluten and all these other folded proteins that are causing problems in other people. Why don't you experiment and take 30 days and not eat grains at all yourself and see what happens? And it really was transformative. It was like amazing how my IBS went away almost immediately, and my arthritic symptoms cleared up, and my skin cleared up, and my GERD. And I just thought to myself, God, I mean, if I was so stubborn in defending my right to eat grains in the face of all this evidence that I'd been accumulating and writing as a blogger about this, because I had started a blog ostensibly to talk about performance and competing for, using diet and exercise and weight training, to enhance your personal performance, whether you were an athlete or whether you were not. If I was someone who was defending my right to eat grains in the face of all this evidence, how many tens of millions of other people must be out there who are wondering what is the cause of their malaise? What is the cause of their gut issues? What is the cause of their arthritic pain? And that's really what prompted me. That's when I said, I need to spread this kind of message to the world.
What is that? What makes you want to defend it? It's that, like, it's not what we know that hurts us. It's what we know for sure that it just isn't so.
Yeah.
So what's that mentality that makes you want to go into defense mode?
Well, I mean, the mentality was more, okay. So just to backtrack a little bit, as a serial entrepreneur, all the time that I've been competing and writing, I was never really an author. I wasn't competing anymore. I was starting businesses. So I had started a supplement company, and I had started a supplement company in the early 90s to provide a safe means for athletes to get the sort of recovery nutrition that it was really difficult to get in a regular diet. And so I was putting together these vitamin and mineral formulations. At the time, I was also involved in the anti-doping movement with the Olympic program. So I was very aware of the abuse of performance-enhancing drugs, PEDs. And so I wanted to offer an opportunity for athletes to have some other means of somehow enhancing their recovery from workout to workout that didn't involve going down that dark hole, that black hole of PEDs. So I started my blog as a means of selling these, as a platform to dispense information about training and weight training and sleep and sun exposure and all these other things, to sell the supplements. Well, as I got further on down the road there, I realized that much of what caused people their problems was or were other, macronutrients, the large part of their regular diet. And so my focus went away from writing about micronutrition and writing about something that had to do maybe with supplementing to more, what's the larger issue here? What's the bigger picture? And so I was writing with the intent of building a platform to sell my supplements. But I sort of shifted when I realized that food was the issue. It wasn't the supplementation that could really make a big difference at all if you didn't have the macronutrition right. So then I shifted over to the macronutrients. And, as an entrepreneur, I was building a platform. I was hoping to sell something. I mean, shortly after launching my platform, I wrote the Primal Blueprint, which you've read. I've written 10 books since then. Several have been New York Times bestsellers. And, each book opened a doorway into exploring what the next level of diet was or the next level of lifestyle was. So then I went from feeling compelled to share this with a few people like you did, like you have your 200 friends that you'd gleaned some interesting tidbits of information that you wanted to share to, expanding it into this podcast. Well, I had the same thing. I feel so compelled to share this information with the world, never really thinking that being an author was going to make me fabulously wealthy. But the writing of a book is such a cathartic experience and kind of gels all the other thinking around it in my life, and I suspect it's with other authors as well, that you keep wanting to increase the knowledge base and share that with the world. Ultimately, what happened is 2014, I had been writing so much about food and had gotten such great feedback on how my ideas about eliminating certain foods and eating real food and avoiding processed foods, avoiding sugar, avoiding grains, avoiding industrial seed oils, the benefits had been so overwhelming for so many hundreds of thousands, if not millions of people, that I realized I had an aha moment that I'm writing so much about food, and what makes food interesting, especially when you cut out all of eliminate all the foods that so many of us would love to eat but can't because they're bad for us, you come down to a fairly small list of foods, right? Meat, fish, fowl, eggs, nuts, seeds, vegetables, a little bit of fruit, maybe some starchy tubers. What makes the difference is what you put on the food, how you prepare it, the methods of preparation, the herbs, the spices, the sauces, the dressings, the toppings. I said, I'm going to make a food company where all I make are things you put on food. And that was the impetus for Primal Kitchen and how we started initially with a avocado oil-based mayonnaise, which was at the time and still is probably the healthiest. Avocado oil is the healthiest oil that you can use of the available oils. And so we launched this product based on partly, certainly wanting to build a business and make a ton of money, but also wanting to offer something that didn't exist in the marketplace. That gets back to your, find a problem that doesn't exist and solve it. The problem existed, but I think much of the world didn't want to acknowledge that problem existed. They were looking for a way to cling to their regular store-bought sauces and dressings and toppings. And we sort of disrupted that whole arena, if you will, in the food world by offering a very clean label with a product that also tasted really good.
A lot of your writings and when you've spoken on podcasts, you speak very eloquently and science-backed on the ketogenic diet. This is still quite a departure for a lot of people listening to this podcast. And, the terminology standard American diet, a portion of our audience are in the US, but, some are across the UK and mainland Europe. The standard American diet, when I reference it as for this conversation, I'm talking more about like a standard athlete diet. Someone, they're not binging out on a full Irish every morning. They're having quite a balanced diet across the macros. If you're talking to somebody right now and they're on that diet, can you briefly explain to me the benefits of moving to a more ketogenic focused diet?
Well, I mean, for an athlete, the ideal scenario is, would you like to burn more fat? Would you like to derive more energy from your own stored body fat when you're on a 200-mile bike ride or a 100-mile bike ride, and not have to rely so much on gel packs and carbohydrate-laden drinks to get you through any sort of effort? Would you like to reduce your body fat level and hence the weight on the bike or the weight on the run of necessity just by cruising through the day, burning off your own stored body fat so it gets down to a level that's still healthy, but maybe in the single digits if you're an athlete? Would you like to recover more quickly from hard workouts? If the answer is yes, and obviously invariably
yes.
the sort of counterintuitive approach is to spend some amount of your training in a carb starved state. In other words, force your body to learn how to burn fats by withholding carbohydrates from your body. The body will adjust to a lot of different scenarios in which the macronutrient input can change. But if you keep feeding it carbohydrates, not just every day, but every meal through your training, the body says, look, I don't need to tap into my carbohydrate. I mean, I don't need to tap into my fat stores because I'm burning carbs all the time. And I've always got a ready supply of glycogen in the muscles. I've got glycogen in the liver. But the fact that I'm going to eat every couple of hours when I'm not training and then eat every 15 or 20 minutes or 30 minutes when I'm training, the body just has no reason to tap into its fat stores, has no reason to build the metabolic machinery to take fat out of storage and combust it in the cells. So you have to create that need. And this goes back to my original premise, which, we all have this genetic ability to derive energy from any substrate, whether it's the glucose in your bloodstream, the glycogen stored in your muscles or your liver, the fat stored in your body, the fat on your plate of food, the ketones that your liver makes in the absence of carbs. And so the argument to eat a ketogenic diet, and by the way, isn't to eat keto all the time. It's to use a ketogenic diet to achieve what we call metabolic flexibility, to be able to fine tune your fuel access to the point that you can derive energy from whatever substrate is available based on what you're doing at the time. So if you're going to be doing, hard sprints, you're going to be fully glycolytic. Your body's great at doing that. You really don't lose that ability. But if you're going to be doing a long slog up a hill, or climbing 12,000 feet over a period of 80-mile ride, you want to be able to derive most of that energy from stored body fat. I can teach you how to do that, but it's going to take you retraining your body to build more mitochondria. We call it mitochondrial biogenesis. You're going to train your body to derive this energy from stored body fat, and it's going to require a little bit of a maybe an uncomfortable shift in how you eat and when you eat. But at the end of the day, it's worth it. One of the reasons, like you're seeing more ketogenic athletes now, you're seeing a lot of ketone esters being used in races and in training. But for the longest time, I told some top pro athletes, I said, look, it may cost you a season, this adaptation, right? You may get to the point where after 1 year of doing this, you've refined all of your ability to derive this new energy source, the stored body fat, so that now you're getting 92% of your energy at say 4 watts per kilogram or 3 watts per kilogram from fat, where you used to only get 60 or 70. But now you're getting more efficient at the long distance, but you maybe lose your top end for a while. Eventually you get your top end, your power back, your maximum sustained power, but it might take more than a season. I don't think many athletes are willing to give up a season, you know what I mean, to fully adapt to this. But those who have and have fully adapted over, say, a year and a half, 2 years, find now that it's much more efficient, much more easy to maintain their body mass, maintain their maximum sustained power output, improve their watts per kilogram over time, and be able to get through longer races and multi-day races, in the case of cycling, with less discomfort, because they train themselves to become more metabolically flexible and less dependent on primarily carbs as this source of emergency fuel. Does that make sense?
Yeah, so for endurance athletes, we're not really looking to bring someone across in an ideal scenario to a ketogenic diet. We're looking to bring them across to having this ability to now use multiple fuel sources, as you call it, metabolic flexibility. Now, I think people, in the same way that you broke down food, and it's actually very simple. There's only a couple of foods, or a short list of foods we actually eat, and it's how we combine those. I think training is much the same. We have days off, our recovery days, we have endurance days, we have interval days, and we have race days. If we're getting started and trying to build this machinery to create metabolic flexibility, is there like a setup you would use where you're like, okay, let me intermittent fast for 16 or 18 hours or whatever your protocol is on rest days and endurance days, but let me fuel with carbohydrates on interval days or race days? Or how would you?
Yeah, that's a great. Yeah. So what I would do is I start I'd pull out and look at the season and say, all right, I'm going to spend 2 months where I know I'm not going to race, and I'm willing to not do glycolytic work, right? I'm just going to be doing like heart rate of maybe 180 minus your age as a max heart rate, which is for a lot of people is like really, really a low heart rate, right? So especially if you're in the 30s or 40s, it's like what do you mean don't exceed 130 beats a minute for 2 months on the bike? Well, in conjunction with the diet, which you're doing, and I would say for a lot of these athletes who are serious, that's when you go full keto for 6 weeks or 8 weeks. I call that a keto reset, and that's really the most efficient way to shift your metabolism and prompt the upregulation of these genes that recognize there's not going to be a lot of carbs, there's not going to be a lot of glucose, so we're going to really become efficient at burning fats, and the brain is going to become more used to and efficient at burning ketones in the absence of glucose. And so in the off season, I would say 6 to 8 weeks of a full-on keto program with a limit on the amount of glycolytic work that you're going to doing. I would say in many cases probably not at all, unless let's just say you went to the gym and you go to the gym and you're doing legs, you're doing presses or lunges or squats or deadlifts, all of which would serve any cyclist and any runner very well to be doing this in the off season. And sort of you build this metabolic machinery. Into that, you build some periods of intermittent fasting, and then as you shift into, you say, okay, now I've done the work, I've done the base work, I've built some of this metabolic machinery. Now I want to employ it. I want to start to do some intervals. I want to start to do some speed work, some maybe short time trials, and with that, then you start to judiciously introduce carbs. So you say, well, tomorrow I'm going to be doing a day at the track, or I'm going to be doing a day in the hills where I'm really going to be going high intensity. Yeah, 150 grams, 200 grams of carbs the night before would serve you well to replenish the glycogen reserves. But understand that, the body doesn't stop making glycogen when you're keto. It still builds glycogen. The only reason that we ever did carbo loading was because we had this weird notion that we had to go hard every single day. And so if we were going to deplete glycogen in one workout today, if I want to do this again tomorrow, I gotta overfill or try to overfill the glycogen stores. Well, if you didn't work hard every day, and that's another thing we've learned through the years about training, you can't go hard every day. I mean, all you're doing is practicing to hurt, but not getting better, not improving this metabolic conditioning. So if you're going to go, and you know that you're not going to go hard after tomorrow's glycolytic day, you're going to do a day of distance, and you're going to pull that heart rate way back. The body keeps making glycogen. It just takes 2 days or 3 days to refill the stores, but it doesn't stop.
So what's the glycogen
making
difference? Has there been like a muscle?
Yeah, it's not.
Or how would you measure?
Yeah, and it's not that much. It's like no. So if you said if multi-day training was not in the program, and I wanted to see how long it took me to build my glycogen stores back, if on day one I deplete them fully with a glycolytic workout, and then day two I was very good about keeping my heart rate below my max aerobic function. So I'm, below that aerobic threshold or that anaerobic threshold. I was really solid about doing that. And all I was going to do was burn fat on that workout or that day. 3 days later, you would say, okay, the total amount of glycogen in the body is now 475 grams, liver and muscles included. And maybe the most it could have been, if I'd overfilled my carbo loading aggressively and intensively, the most it could have been is 600 grams throughout the body. But now it's 475. Those are not rate limiting factors in any way, shape, or form. You understand that if you ever read any of Tim Noakes' work, brilliant. And he was the man for 30 years. He was the go-to guy. I was like, okay, I got to go see what Noakes says about carbohydrate management and glycogen stores and all of that. But he came up with this notion years ago, the central governor theory of the brain, which said, when you hit the wall, when you bonk, it is not that you have run out of muscle glycogen. It's that your brain said, no, in a survival protective mechanism, time to pull over to the side of the road because we're going to start to, cannibalize muscle tissue. We're going to eat into reserves that we can't afford to eat into. It's the brain that says pull over. It's not the legs that run out of glycogen. So in a fully depleted glycogen state for an athlete who's like gone to the wall and bonked, there's still 150 or 175 grams of glycogen left dispersed throughout the liver and the muscle. Well, maybe not so much the liver, but the muscles. So you can't get to zero. You don't deplete the glycogen reserves down to zero. You just take it from maybe 550 down to 200 or maybe 150. So that's only 300 grams of glycogen that you have at your disposal, efficiently and effectively at your disposal, which is only 1,200 calories worth of work, right? So unless you are taking in continuous IVs or filling up with glucose gels through a ride or throughout a ride, or eating a bar, you don't have that much access to carbohydrates. So the real rate limiter is how much fat can you burn at that rate of output, at that 2.4 watts per kilogram up to 3.5, 4 watts per kilogram. How much can you shift the amount of energy coming from fat stores away from carbohydrate stores, which has the effect of unburdening your stomach, of having to take in 60 grams of carbs every hour just to make up the difference, right? So back to the training aspect of this, and training your body to become more efficient and more effective at burning fats. It also becomes more effective. The brain becomes more reliant on the ketones and says, you know what, if we run out of glucose, I'm not going to panic. I'm not going to send a ton of cortisol to the liver to try and strip a couple of amino acids from the muscles to create more glucose. The brain becomes more adept and comfortable burning the ketones that are produced by the liver in this absence of glucose. And that's where this whole, back to Noakes, the central governor theory of the brain. And you say, well, if I can orchestrate my diet and my training so that my brain doesn't start getting wonky and cause me to get sleepy and pull over the side of the road, but the brain can kind of bypass this because it now is comfortable with ketones, then I can extend my time to exhaustion judiciously by the use of this new fat burning superpower that I've brought onto myself.
Is there a Pareto principle version of this? And is that like what your new book is a move towards, making it? That's a hardcore example, like asking somebody, unless they're super studious and they're digging into the research for themselves and they have 100% faith in this, asking somebody to shelve 1 year of their season, take 2 months out for keto, it's maybe a plunge for a lot of people. I'm wondering, is there a Pareto version where we can say, okay, you're in season, you want to get some of the benefits of building this metabolic flexibility, but you don't want to go, full jumping out of the plane with no parachute? How can they integrate it in sort of a graded manner?
Yeah, I mean, I think what I just described is probably a very doable process that you can get closer to. It's not binary, right? It's not all or nothing. You can get better at it, at this sort of fat burning reliance, through any measure of shift toward a lower carb, higher fat dietary regimen. It's sure. I mean, I think if you're an age group athlete, or you're a cat 2, cat 3, whatever, cat 4 cyclist, and you got a long window ahead of you, because part of this is sustainability, right? I see a lot of athletes that burn out, and I was one. I burned out because of my reliance on carbs. Had I known what I know now about this metabolic flexibility, and also how much time I should have spent in the gym building power and what we call MSP, maximum sustained power, I would have cut my miles down. I probably would have extended my career, my elite career, by a number of years. So if you're looking for the secret to doing this over a long period of time, it absolutely is found in gradually refining your metabolic flexibility to be able to be more efficient and put more miles in with less effort, with less, put higher power in with less effort, recover faster. So any amount of shifting toward this metabolic flexibility, and there are ways of doing it. You can do it again in the off season. You mentioned metabolic flexibility. I mean, you mentioned intermittent fasting. That's certainly one way to sort of prompt the body to say, look, there's not a lot of food around, even to get through a non-training day. Let's call upon our fat-burning superpowers. Let's upregulate all these fat-burning enzymes and pull them out of storage, and pull fat out of storage and combust it. That's another way of doing this. It doesn't have to be just through manipulating the diet with draconian reduction in carbohydrate. It can be done with a combination of that and with intermittent fasting. I wrote a book a few years ago called, was probably 10 years ago now, called Primal Endurance. And so any of your listeners who want to kind of get a real full primer on that, Primal Endurance was my answer to people who said, hey, Mark, I'd love to go do a marathon, but I don't want to hurt myself. I don't want to sacrifice my health in pursuit of this kind of bucket list item, right? Because I'm not a big fan of running marathons. And I did 50 of them in my career initially as a marathon, but I'm not a fan of doing it. But my response was, okay, if you insist on doing this, I will show you how to do it in a way that's kinder and gentler than the historic, training programs that everybody from my generation embarked upon and in large part suffered from because of the lack of knowledge of the details of how the body actually
Well, I think you've
fat.
hit the nail on the head there, because it's this dual focus, which 99% of our listeners here, the goal isn't performance. They might say the goal is performance, but if you step back and you analyze it, the goal is performance and sustainability / long-term health. Whereas if you look at, I get a chance to chat on the podcast to the very best cyclists and runners in the world, their goal isn't sustainability a lot of the time. Their goal is just performance. And that carbohydrate intake, 60 was one I would have for years said 60 grams per hour. It's gone north of 120 at the moment in the World Tour cyclists at the very top. And
Yeah.
for me, even trying that out training, 120 grams of carbohydrates plays havoc on your gastro system. Like there's no sustainability around that if you look at a 10-year period of that sort of carbohydrate intake.
Yeah, I had no idea that was ramping up from the 60. 60 was the sort of starting point for long, Ironman events and things like that, but certainly multi-day events where you're trying to meter out your output over not just a 3-hour event, but over multi-day 4-hour and 5-hour and 6-hour events.